Hi, this is Caroline from The Happy Sensitive with a video on boundaries. This is a question I got, though the question wasn't really much of a question. It was just boundaries. It's like, what would you like more help with? Boundaries. So very, very broad question. But I have taken the liberty of breaking it down into these subcategories. What are they? What are they really? Reality check. How do you do them? Where do they go? Because, sometimes they disappear. And who manages them? All right, so let's get started. What are they? So boundaries are technically flexible stop signs, flexible limitations, flexible filters. Boundaries are a kind of resistance where you don't just let everything and everyone in. You don't just let everything and everyone happen. That's what boundaries are. They're not walls. They're not moats. They're not canals. They're not fixed in one place. They can move, like one day your boundary might be here, the next day it might be there, depending on certain circumstances. But they are holding something back. They're filtering something out. They're not just letting everything in. Now, what are boundaries really? I was thinking about this today. Boundaries are really actually seeing things for what they are. And that sounds really, really easy, but it's actually really, really hard because we people have all these little delusions and all these little schemes and all these little, fantasies that we have about ourselves, about other people, and those get in the way of boundaries. Boundaries are actually not these supersonic special things. Boundaries, like when you actually see things for what they are, you naturally have good boundaries. But like really see things for what they are, as in really see what is possible here, what's not possible here. What am I about? What is this other person about? What has been happening? Not what I want to happen, not what I hope will happen, not what I wish will happen, but what actually is happening. And when you base your decisions on those things, you have boundaries. But this is where, we tend to get stuck. And a lot of our childhood involves dancing around messed up things and then telling ourselves stories that make us feel better. And that's where our boundaries get screwed up. That's the simple version. So how do you do boundaries? Well, to do boundaries well, you need to constantly practice noticing what is really going on with me and what is really going on around me. So it requires being present. It requires feeling. It requires understanding what your feelings mean. So boundaries are intimately tied up with understanding yourself. You cannot have good boundaries if you have no idea who you are, what you want, and what you feel. You can't. Then you can just kind of download some random boundaries from some guy named John and it works for him, but it's not going to work for you. Where do boundaries go? Boundaries, they disappear when our illusions creep in and our hopes and dreams that will never be, especially about other people. We think, maybe if I will just do more of this, they will do more of that. Even though they've shown you time and time again that they never do that, they always do this other thing. But you don't really want to come to terms with that because it's painful and it's hard. So then your boundaries just skedaddle. Like, no, I don't need any boundaries. I just need to think positively, have a good attitude, and just try harder and do the same damn thing again and again and again. And that's when our boundaries disappear. Who manages boundaries? Like, you always manage your own boundaries. Any situation where you feel somebody is walking all over you, you are the one managing the boundaries. The only thing is, you may not like the options that you have. This is where people often get stuck. They don't like the options they have, so they pretend they have no options. And it's like, oh, this is just happening to me. You always have options. But this comes back to seeing things for what they really are and not what you wish they were. And that's where boundaries really come in. When you see things for what they are, boundaries are easy. When you don't see things for what they are, boundaries are very confusing and very difficult. But this is why, when I work with clients on boundaries, a lot of the work on boundaries revolves around helping them understand what are they feeling, what are they wanting, when are they hitting their limits, how do they know? Because as a highly sensitive person, you hit your limits more quickly than most other people. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Doesn't mean you can't do things. It just means you need to realize in time, like, oh, I've hit my limit. And what happens to a lot of us is that we get taught to use John's limits and do it the way that John does. And John does things differently than you do. And so you think that you have to live by John's rules or there's something wrong with you. And then you don't actually have good boundaries. You just have random boundaries that you've downloaded off the internet, basically. You're like, here's some boundaries. I guess I'll just take these. And those are not going to work for you. So your boundaries are always very personal. It's always about you. You cannot have good boundaries if you don't know yourself. And so when I work with clients, I really help them tune in, connect back in, like, wait, what is it that they need? What is it that they want? What are their own limits? And there's often a discovery journey because we're not really taught to get to know ourselves. There's not a lot of people that'll tell you, like, spend some time getting to understand what really works for you. Sometimes people will tell you to figure out what you want, but often what people mean is like in your head, that you come up with a story, you come up with a nice movie that sounds good, and then you try to like fit that. But that's not what boundaries are, because then you're going off into the dreamscape again. And you're just like, oh, if only I could, and I wish. And your boundaries are based on what is actually happening, what you're actually capable of in this moment. And what you're capable of tomorrow can be slightly different. So your boundaries today and tomorrow can be different, but your boundaries are always based on what is actually happening right here, right now. If you'd like to know more about boundaries for highly sensitive people, I have a program, Happy Sensitive Foundations. This is all about boundaries for highly sensitive people. There's a free opt-in email series that talks more about boundaries and how this can be difficult for highly sensitive people, the kind of things you can struggle with, especially if you're someone who you want to do things, but you feel like your sensitivity is holding you back. Like you're just kind of bumping into it all the time. Like, oh, if only I wasn't so sensitive because now I can't do the thing I want. It's actually not the problem that you think it is, and the email series explains how that works. All right. I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.